excited to introduce you to our speaker today. I just met her today, and I think it's going to be a great presentation. She came highly recommended to our program committee because of her presentations at some other Rotary clubs, and I heard about her from both Hilliard and Upper Arlington Rotary. But her name is Jaren M. Terry, and she volunteers as Vice President of the Board for PFLAG Columbus. PFLAG is committed to advancing equality through its mission of support, education, and advocacy of the LGBTQ community. She is a public relations practitioner and president of Jaren Terry Communications, specializing in the healthcare field for 35 years. I know she doesn't look like she's been working that long, but she told me how old she is, and she looks fabulous for her age. Just saying.
Funeral director.
Yeah. Oh, good one. Gosh, that was great. That was great. Yeah. Glad all these lights are on. She is an Ohio native, and Jaren earned her bachelor's and master's degrees from Virginia Commonwealth University, and today is adjunct faculty at Franklin University, where she teaches crisis communications and creative thinking at the undergraduate level. An entrepreneur and veteran of the U.S. Women's Army Corps, Jaren is an authentic, dedicated practitioner, presenter, teacher, mentor, community volunteer, wife, and mother. She's an advocate for social justice and human rights and uses her voice to speak for diversity, equality, and inclusion. She aspires to treat everyone as she wishes to be treated and seeks to instill that value in others through her example. Jaren's life inspiration is found in the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." Help me give Jaren Terry a warm Rotary welcome.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming today and acknowledge my colleague Cynthia Vermillion, who will come forward and give her personal testimony at the end of my talk. So, launching right in, the clicker is here. And this one, I'm told, is forward. Oh, good. Okay. So this presentation is meant to be non-political, non-religious, and non-judgmental. By non-judgmental, that means that I hope you won't judge me if I present facts with which you don't agree. And it means I won't judge you if you hold the opinion that what I present isn't supported by fact or experience. In fact, if you'd like to see my sources, please leave me your email address, and I'll be happy to email you my reference list. So let's jump right in with terminology, because before we can talk about best business practices for inclusion, or even who PFLAG is, let's first get on the same page about this alphabet soup. First, I want you to understand that the letters LGBTQ represent two different things: sexual orientation and gender identity. So let's break it down. Sexual orientation is about who you are attracted to. And first, everyone in this room has a sexual orientation. Now, I'm not asking for a show of hands, but I want you to understand that your sexual orientation is not a choice. It is not something you choose, and it's not a preference. A person is born with their orientation. And now, if you're not sure that you understand that it's not a choice, I invite you to think for a minute about when you first made your conscious decision, weighing all the alternatives, to be attracted to men or to be attracted to women. So, although the majority of humans are attracted to members of the opposite sex, I think that we all understand that that's not true for everyone. And so the first three letters of the alphabet soup are about sexual orientation, L, G, and B. Lesbians and gays are attracted to persons of their same biological sex. Bisexual people care more about the person than about the person's biological sex. Gender identity is also something we're born with, and it is not a choice. As we know, At birth, the doctor takes a look at the baby's genitals and pronounces, "It's a boy," or "It's a girl." But what we now know from people's lived experience as well as science is the doctor doesn't always get that right. In fact, gender is not a binary, either male or female. Instead, it is on a spectrum. So yes, most of us are at one end of the spectrum or the other, identifying as male or female, but that's not true for everyone. So biological sex is one thing, and gender identity is another. Now, not to get all science-y on you, but scientists now know that the timing of hormonal influences, as well as chromosomal differences, as well as other factors not yet understood, account for gender identity. That is, how a person identifies as a male or female or someone in between. And so back to the alphabet soup for a moment. The T stands for transgender, which is different from cisgender. That may be a word that many of you have not heard before. I'm cisgender. That simply means that the gender with which I identify aligns with the gender I was assigned at birth. More graphically, the doctor took a peek. He said it's a girl, and he was right. For my generation, the word queer was a slur and not to be used. Today, however, young people, as you'll hear a bit later in my talk, have reclaimed the word. Why? Partly because when you understand that sexual orientation and gender identity are on spectrums, using the term queer is just telling you that they see themselves as somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, or maybe they just feel it's none of your business who they love or who they are. All they want us to know is that they are not straight and they're not cisgender. So, LGBTQIA+. LGBTQ is the widely accepted terminology when talking about the community, but you may sometimes also see the I or the A or the plus sign. The I stands for intersex. These are people who at birth the doctor wasn't sure because the baby had physical characteristics of both biological sexes. Statistically, if I can say that word, there are as many people born intersex as there are redheads in the world. Wow, indeed. And so the A can stand for asexual, again, thinking about orientation being on a spectrum, or it can also stand for ally. And the plus sign acknowledges that the variation of humanity is deep and beautiful, and it makes sure that no one is left out. And so it's important not to leave anyone out, and that's why PFLAG was founded in 1972 through the love of one mother for her gay son. PFLAG originally stood for Parents, Friends, and Family of Lesbians and Gays. Now PFLAG uses just the acronym to encompass everyone, envisioning a world where diversity is celebrated and all people are respected, valued, and affirmed, inclusive of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, their gender expression, race, sex, age, or any other human characteristic. Not coincidentally, I became involved in PFLAG because of my husband and my love for our gay son. By meeting people where they are and collaborating with others, PFLAG, which is a 501c3 organization relying on contributions, realizes its vision through support for families and allies of LGBTQ people and for people who are LGBTQ themselves, education for ourselves and others about the unique issues and challenges facing LGBTQ people, and advocacy in our communities to change attitudes and create policies and laws that achieve full equality for persons who are LGBTQ. So part of why I said yes when Michael asked me to speak to you today is because PFLAG hopes to turn ordinary people, and even those who may hold socially motivated or religiously motivated negative views of LGBTQ people, into allies. And so if you find yourself on the far, is that left of the spectrum, the person standing there with the bag over their head because they don't really want to admit that they do support LGBTQ people, we ask you to move along and get to the other end where you're actually advocating on behalf of them. So let's make the business case for inclusion by taking a look at the best business practices equation that all good businesses should incorporate. So you take reputation management, which goes hand in hand with crisis planning, which, by the way, should be part of your public relations and marketing plan, as should corporate social responsibility. And it goes without saying, ethics. You add these together, and done the right way, the impact on your company's business bottom line through your ability to attract, hire, and retain good employees, and of course, target customers and close with those customers should be positive. So where does diversity and inclusion come into this equation? Diversity and inclusion in the workplace, in the boardroom, and throughout the community is more than a trend. It is a business imperative. With the United States increasingly racially and culturally diverse, and equality for LGBTQ individuals increasingly accepted, organizations that persist in affinity-based hiring practices and board choices risk failing to attract and losing good employees, alienating their customers, and tarnishing their reputations, all of which have a negative impact on the bottom line. In fact, more than a trend, LGBTQ people are mainstream. According to a Pew Research Center study published in June of this year, 10.1 million Americans identify themselves as LGBTQ, which is 4.1% of the population. And the majority of gays and lesbians are out of the closet, I mean. 78% live their lives in the open. One of my favorite quotes, if Harry Potter taught us nothing else, it's that no one deserves to live in a closet. With more people living their lives out and in the mainstream comes growing acceptance. That same Pew study, corroborated by a Harris poll, tells us that 87% of all people say they know someone who is lesbian, gay, or bisexual. However, that familiarity and acceptance is not yet extended to everyone. UCLA's Williams Institute estimates there are 1.4 million transgender people in the United States. But according to a GLAAD-Harris Interactive poll, only 16% of Americans say they personally know someone who is transgender. Compare that to the 87% who know someone who's gay, lesbian, or bi. And sadly, transgender people experience unemployment at double the rate of the general population. Beyond the workplace, trans people face violence on the street and at home, discrimination in health care, and more, including most recently the right to serve in the military. The Williams Institute at UCLA estimates there are nearly 135,000 transgender veterans who have served the country with honor and distinction. And I just want to say, November 19th's PFLAG meeting will feature Stephen Snyder Hill, who is the author of Soldier of Change. He lived through the Don't Ask, Don't Tell era and is taking on the more recent comments. We'll leave it there. So among young people ages 10 to 24, lesbian, gay, and bisexual youth are 4 to 6 times more likely to attempt suicide than are their straight peers. And transgender youth are 8.4 times more likely. And when acceptance of these trans children is low in their homes, the despair leading to suicide is higher. And so we need to educate. I'm happy to say that in January of this year, National Geographic dedicated an entire issue of their magazine to transgender children. It is available online, by the way. And I'm proud to say they teamed with PFLAG National to produce a nationally televised program, Gender Revolution, featuring Katie Couric. It's fantastic. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to. So programs such as this go a long way toward advancing acceptance and saving young lives. Happily, among the younger generation we call millennials, ages 18 to 34, there's barely a question of acceptance. According to a first-of-its-kind Harris poll conducted for GLAAD, this is a quote, "Young people today are more accepting of LGBTQ people than ever before. And as acceptance has grown in this country, so too has the number of young people who describe themselves as LGBTQ." In fact, that same poll reveals that 63% of cisgender straight millennials consider themselves allies, and another 23% consider themselves supporters. That's 86% of millennials up to age 34 who say they are allies. Of all millennials, 20% identify themselves as LGBTQ. And that's striking when you recall that at the beginning of this talk I quoted 4.1% of Americans identifying as LGBTQ. But among millennials, 20%. So here's what's going on. Keep in mind, I explained that for a person who is transgender, it means that their gender identity does not align with the biological sex they were assigned at birth. And although the majority of people are cisgender aligning, fully 12% of millennials say they are not cisgender. So this is where you get a better understanding of why they're reclaiming the term queer. Basically, they're just saying they are on the spectrum, not identifying as trans or cisgender, but somewhere in between. And so what does this mean for businesses today who are already hiring millennials, and businesses of tomorrow who will be run by or owned by millennials? These young people want to work in inclusive environments where organizations ranging from publicly traded conglomerates to nonprofits understand that diversity and inclusion of all people is enriching for everyone, from coworkers to customers. Otherwise, these young people are going to say, talk to the hand. So one more signpost for rising acceptance, and this is important because these millennials may already make up a significant portion of your workforce. For a person who is not cisgender and not transgender, they don't want to be referred to as he or she. So in May of this year, the AP Style Book, which is the rules guide for journalists and for PR people, approved use of the word they as a singular pronoun. And anybody who's in PR or journalism, I mean, you're like so relieved that this has finally been settled. So let's dig in. Open for Business is a coalition of global companies demonstrating that open, inclusive, and diverse societies are better for business and better for economic growth. The study found that in countries that have anti-gay laws, most people would boycott or not even want to take a vacation in those areas. These are just a few of the members of the Open for Business Coalition. The report of the coalition presents the evidence base to demonstrate that businesses thrive in tolerant societies and that the spread of anti-LGBT policies runs counter to the interest of business and economic development. Other research reveals that having a broad mix of viewpoints and experiences and thought achieved through a diverse workforce makes a significant positive impact on market performance, strategy development, and other core drivers of organizational effectiveness. And diverse hiring is seen to have a direct correlation to improve financial performance, and conversely, when employees believe their ability to advance in an organization is hindered by bias on the part of their superiors, their coworkers, or their clients, undesired consequences can emerge. For example, a 2016 Center for Talent Innovation survey out in the world found that professionals at large organizations who feel stymied by bias may face burnout, make plans to leave, and are critical of their organizations. The study found that 82% of customers who are allies to LGBTQ people say they're more likely to purchase goods from companies that support LGBTQ employees. 82% of customers care. So what does it look like when companies get it right compared to those who get it wrong? Let's take a look at a few quick examples of what you don't want to happen to your brand. So Rigatoni Pasta is a small, well, it's an international pasta company in Italy, and their CEO went on a small AM radio show and talked about family values that did not include LGBTQ families. And the outrage was swift, and it went viral. It wasn't just a little radio show anymore. It was everywhere. And in case you think your competitors might come to your aid, oh no, they jumped on board. Now, I don't read Italian, and those in the back probably can't even tell it's Italian, but isn't the picture worth 1,000 words? Here's another competitor who also jumped on board. And this is my favorite, that says, "We are all in." Another company with which you might be familiar is Chick-fil-A. Their CEO, Dan Cathy, also thinking he was talking to a very small group, expressed that his family values did not include everyone in the family. And that went viral, and it got really ugly. And in fact, the franchisees across the country jumped on board with Mr. Cathy, going so far as to post signs that said, "We hate gays, stay out." Kind of reminds you of the Jim Crow era when somebody else was on the sign, doesn't it? And marchers went all across the country in support of LGBTQ persons. And one thing you don't want to happen to your brand tagline, "Tastes like chicken," is that it tastes like hate. In fact, it was made clear by the vast majority of those on social media that hate is not a family value. And sadly, churches got on board, many taking the side of Dan Cathy and Chick-fil-A and trying to bolster their bottom line by buying their product for their church functions. Didn't go over too well. In fact, HRC's corporate, oh, well, no, I'm sorry, too fast. So in fact, if you compare that to a company that got it right, Target really stuck by their guns when they were criticized for supporting LGBTQ people, in particularly trans people, allowing them to use whichever bathroom was appropriate for them. And they doubled down on that with their support of the LGBT community in other arenas, and their bottom line improved. So the Corporate Equality Index, published by the Human Rights Campaign, finds that the nation's largest employers have demonstrated through their actions that LGBTQ people are not just tolerated but welcomed in the workplaces and communities. The Corporate Equality Index saw the largest increase in top-rated businesses in the history of the survey, now in its 15th year, with more than 500 employers earning a perfect score of 100 in 2017. In addition, this year saw the Corporate Equality Index's largest jump among businesses offering transgender inclusive health care coverage. This past year, as an unprecedented wave of anti-LGBTQ bills spread across the country, corporate champions from state to state, including North Carolina and Texas, made their voices heard and stood firmly on the side of fairness and equality. At 82% of Fortune 500 companies, some of whom you see represented here, LGBTQ employees saw a path to bringing their full selves to the workplace. In other words, they are living their lives out. And as a result, executives can put a human face on the need for full equality, and allies can proudly display a show of support for their LGBTQ colleagues and friends. And so in conclusion, I hope I helped you see that diversity and inclusion is not just the ethically right thing to do, it's also good for business. And I want to caution you to not just be intent on checking off the box for diversity by just hiring people of diverse characteristics, but also pay attention to inclusion issues. So what does inclusion look like? Inclusion is having supportive environments that provide mentorship, assign meaningful projects, encourage openness, and offer promotion opportunities. An easy way to remember the difference between diversity and inclusion is that diversity is receiving an invitation to the dance, but inclusion is actually being asked to dance, not just to sit on the sidelines, but participating in meaningful work and being given the opportunity to make a real contribution to the company. So what can you do right now? Because encouraging diversity and inclusion in business goes hand in hand with the best practices of equal protection in the workplace, you'll see on your tables information about Ohio Business Competes, which is a coalition of Ohio businesses that favor including LGBTQ people in statewide non-discrimination policy. It's free to join, and by doing so, your brand and logo will be listed with other well-known companies, some of which I'm sure are represented in the room today, along with notables such as The Ohio State University, go Bucks, GE, AT&T, Sherwin-Williams, Bob Evans, and Huntington Bank, as well as several major Columbus law firms. And so now I'd like to introduce Cynthia Vermillion. Cynthia is a businesswoman who is self-employed as a realtor in residential property with Coldwell Banker King Thompson. She's a member of the board for PFLAG, and in fact is our vice president-elect for next year. Come on up, Cynthia. And has come today to provide her personal testimony. So please welcome my dear friend and fellow PFLAG mother, Cynthia Vermillion.
Well, every time I hear Jaren speak, she brings tears to my eyes. I'm already emotional when I get up here, and I haven't said a word. I want to thank Columbus Rotary Club for allowing us to speak with you today on what I feel is a very important topic. My husband and I moved to Hilliard in the late summer of 2004 with our 4 children. We raised them in what many would label a conservative environment. We attended church every Sunday for 3 hours. We prayed daily as a family. We read scriptures together most days. We talked a lot about Jesus Christ and how his teachings apply to our lives in a very practical and real way. In 1995, our church issued a document to the world entitled "The Family, a Proclamation to the World." In this document, our church leaders affirmed that God intended marriage to be between one man and one woman. My oldest daughter was 1 year old that year. As the other three came along, we periodically read through this document as a family and talked about the different points made, including one man, one woman marriage. Before I had children, I had worked with several gay and lesbian people that I really liked. They were fine, upstanding people, and I always felt they deserved respect and protection under the laws of our country, states, and localities. In fact, I always wondered, I'd love to know what causes people to become gay. I'd love to interview several different people to find out more about this aspect of their lives. That was my thinking back then. As my children grew, we rarely talked about homosexuality because I certainly didn't want to put this thought into their minds. Not that I felt worried because all my children had had crushes on kids of the opposite gender when they were young. I still thought that there had to be a cause for people to become gay or transgender. Well, fast forward to 2013, when my beautiful second daughter was a junior at Hilliard-Darby. She was on the cross-country team, an honor student. She would become a National Merit finalist in her senior year, just like her big sister. I was taking her to see a counselor for a phobia she had experienced since early childhood. Well, on this particular evening, returning from our appointment, she told me she had told the counselor about a crush she had on a fellow cross-country runner, a girl. I handled it very matter-of-factly. I was so proud of myself, thanking her for letting me know, and I figured it was just a passing girl crush. No big deal. I only mentioned it a couple of times after that during the next year to check in and see how she was feeling about this other girl who had graduated a year ahead of her. College came, and we took our sweet daughter to New York and the excitement of Vassar College. She said she had a passing fancy for a fellow student, a guy. All was well, I thought. The fancy soon passed, however, and she became enchanted with a girl on the basketball team, a straight girl. That winter, my husband and I and her big sister, who knew all along and was very supportive of her sister, went to visit our dear daughter at Vassar and had an honest conversation that let us know that this was not a passing phase. She came out to us as a lesbian. Knowing our hopes and dreams for her, this wasn't easy. Coming from a very conservative theological teaching, this couldn't have been easy for her. Big sister was there to make sure that we supported her little sister. There was never any doubt that we would, and I was very hurt that my oldest daughter would think that we would choose not to support her. I spent the next year crying daily and praying fervently to know how to handle this situation. I could not sit in church. Gosh, I was crying at this point. I could not sit in church without crying. It was my period of mourning. However, curiously, I never felt to pray for her to change. What I did hear as an answer to my prayer was that I just needed to love and support her and do what I felt to be right. She came to earth this way. She didn't choose the gay lifestyle. She has a heart of gold and yearns to one day be in a loving, committed relationship. I could never deny my sweet child the joy and love that we straight people can enjoy without being encumbered with labels such as sinner, sick, depraved, and evil. The daily tears have long ago stopped. They were replaced with the resolve to do everything I can to help people understand and accept my child and every other mother's child. When I hear about business owners claiming their religious freedom is under assault because they don't want to be forced to bake a cake or take photos at a same-sex wedding, I know that to be laughable. I'm a real estate agent by profession. It would have zero effect on my religious beliefs if I helped a gay couple or an unmarried couple find a home to buy. Does that cake maker ask all potential customers about their private lives? Anyone who has had premarital sex or uses drugs or abuses his or her partner or has a criminal conviction should not be customers either. Or divorced. Because why? Oh yeah, a stranger's life affects their religious practices. As many of you are business owners and professionals, My plea to you all today is to realize the folly of the religious freedom argument when it comes to whether or not to provide your service or product to a person who identifies as LGBTQ. In sharing my very personal and heartfelt story, I want you to know that I come from a very religious background, and I get it. And I get that my religion has nothing to do with who my clients are. I get that different groups of people have been oppressed in the name of religion, and it's an oppression that needs to stop in the United States of America, in Ohio, and in Columbus. I would ask all of you to go one step further. If you personally know a fellow business owner anywhere in Central Ohio who practices discrimination using religious freedom as a cover, please share with them that this argument is false. Share with them that all people in the United States of America are entitled to be treated with respect and dignity, including serving them as a customer without judging their lives. Period. Thank you, Columbus Rotary, for letting me share my story and my plea.
And I know that we are close to the end of your time here, but we're open for questions. Yes?
So you mentioned there's an introduction of a lot of religious freedom bills at the state level. Are there any pro-equality bills that are currently under consideration?
Yes, actually, there is a law that Rep. Nikki Antonio from the Cleveland area has put forth at the State House. It's SB 160, I believe is the number. There's also a House bill that says the same thing, and basically those bills are for granting the same equal rights protections that are available to every other American to LGBTQ people, meaning you can't be fired from your job just because you're LGBTQ. You can't be denied housing just because you're LGBTQ. You can have your cake baked regardless of who you are. So putting things into law, and as we know from our country's history, in the 1960s, it took a law in 1964 to actually effect real change for a large portion of our population. I'm talking about African Americans. And so maybe it's going to take a law for this country too, and I support that. Thank you for the question.
That's why it's really important to stay active in politics and write and call your representatives and your senators so that they know that it's important to you, and they don't just table it and not ever get a vote on it.
Thank you, Jaron, and thank you, Cynthia. We appreciate your talk. Join us again next week when not only will we have Major General Mark Bartman, Ohio's Adjutant General, here as our speaker, but Tweedledee and Tweedlejack will be returning to their normal form. So, thank you.